The Houston Rockets have ruined their rebuild. But let's back it up a bit. On January 13th, 2021, the Houston Rockets officially entered their rebuild. The day officially signified the end of the James Harden era, and in turn, the beginning of a several-year youth movement in Houston. Since then, the Rockets have had 17, 20, and 22 win seasons, have been memed for playing AAU-type basketball, and have struggled to find success on the court. But this summer looked to be a summer that they could start to turn the corner. Ime Udoka was brought in to be the new head coach after having great success on the court in Boston in his 1 year there. In a stunning turn of events, Thompson and Cam Whitmore were both added to this roster and just added to a growing group of young talent that they've added throughout their rebuild, which already includes Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Porter Jr., Terry Eason, and Alperen Sengun. And they entered free agency with the cap space to spend and to add a few veterans to support and mentor this young talent. Well, spend the Houston Rockets did. They spent the most money out of anyone in free agency, signing Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, Jock Landale, Jeff Green, and Aaron Holiday, giving out over $250 million in contracts within a couple of weeks, and adding at least 4 key rotational players to their roster. Now you'll notice I've already mentioned 4 key free agency signings, 2 new first-round selections, and 5 members of their young core. And now you have to figure out how to get everyone happy with their touches, with their minutes, and all whilst trying to be more competitive next season and still trying to develop your young talent. Needless to say, Ime Udoka and company have a tall task this upcoming season. But let's dive into more of the specifics into what they did this offseason and how it has ruined their rebuild. Fred VanVleet was rumored to get a bag from the Rockets, but $129 million was not exactly in the expectations and was an insane dollar amount for a formerly undrafted player. Nonetheless, I'm not actually that mad at Fred VanVleet's contract. Sure, he did get a bag, and the Rockets are going to be using 30% of the salary cap over the next 2 years solely on Fred VanVleet. But it's only for 2 years, the third year is a team option, and so the Rockets can be off his money and minutes within 2 years and before any of their young talent get their future extensions. It might be a massive payday, but it does not restrict their financial flexibility in the long term. Dillon Brooks was the other heavily rumored big signing of the summer for Houston, and he has gone from a guy who was being memed on Twitter about going to China, but then ends up getting $86 million over the next 4 years. Now, as much as Dillon Brooks has become the villain of the NBA over the last 6 to 12 months, I still really value what Brooks can bring to the defensive end and what intensity he can bring to a team's culture. Despite all of his antics and all the criticism he has gotten as of late, he is still one of the best wing defenders in the league and has been regularly called the heart of the Grizzlies from members of their coaching staff as well as his own teammates. The fact this deal was a sign-and trade and what they had to give up in the sign-and trade is what gives me concerns about the signing, which we will touch on later, but I do like what he brings to the roster individually, and considering his salary gets smaller the further it goes into the contract, I don't really hate it from a financial aspect either. Moving on to some of the more complimentary signings, Jock Landale got his bag after a decent playoff run with the Suns. He'll be getting $32 million over the next 4 years, but only the first year of that is guaranteed, so the Rockets have a ton of flexibility here and can get a cheaper backup center whenever they want after this season. Jeff Green also got himself another solid contract after winning a title with the Denver Nuggets and will give the Rockets a little bit more forward depth heading into next season. And Aaron Holiday, who's in for some point guard depth, is only signed for the year on a minimum contract. Despite the big paydays, which certainly there is a reason to be frustrated with, I'm personally not too concerned about it, and it's far from my biggest concern of the things that the Rockets did this offseason. The biggest reason I believe the Rockets have ruined the rebuild is the direction that they have taken this offseason, and the difficulty they may now have in developing some of their young talent, the young talent they've been prioritizing for the last few years, and that may now be in doubt. My concerns originate with the Dillon Brooks signing. Adding Dillon Brooks to the roster, as I previously mentioned, I think I am a fan of. Dillon Brooks, independently of how you got him on the roster is a positive addition. And that contract, I honestly don't mind it that much either, especially when you consider the fact he will be getting paid more now than he will be in a few years' time. What's important to remember with the Dillon Brooks signing is that it was not made with their cap space. They used up all of their cap space before they signed Dillon Brooks. This was made via a 5-team sign-in trade. Acquiring Dillon Brooks saw the Rockets trade away 2 2021 former first-round picks in Josh Christopher and Usman Garuba, their 2022 first-round pick, who's barely gotten any opportunity in the league yet, in Ty Washington. They also traded away 22-year-old wing in Kenyon Martin Jr., and 5 second-round picks. The Rockets essentially gave up 3 first-round picks, 5 second-round picks, and a solid rotational wing for Dillon Brooks. Now, of course, there is nuance to that. Those first-round picks were late first-round picks, and none of the 3 of them have found their role yet in the NBA, but all 3 of Garuba, Christopher, and Ty Washington still have upside and were not given much run throughout last season to show their level of productivity moving forward in the NBA. This move clearly indicates that the Rockets are done developing any young talent that they had that has not yet proven themselves as valuable NBA players, and they're done trying to develop young talent for depth, instead just favoring free agency. They've gone from a position where they were hoarding first-round picks to now just moving off of 3 of their first-round picks they've made throughout the last 3 drafts, all in one swoop to get Dillon Brooks. Instead of letting Ty Washington continue to develop and giving him an opportunity as a depth point guard, they move off of him, don't give him a chance to reach his upside, and opt to just bring in Aaron Holiday. Instead of letting Usman Garuba continue to get a chance as the backup center and trying to make the best of his defensive upside, the Rockets just decide to give up, bring in Jock Landale, and make him the new backup instead. The Rockets are clearly done developing talent on the fringes of their roster, and 3 years into this rebuild have decided with Ime Udoka now at head coach, they just want to try and be as competitive as possible. The other biggest problem with their offseason, outside of moving off of all of these second-round picks and former first-round picks, is that they have added so much talent to win now while still having so much young talent to develop on the roster. And there are plenty of mouths to feed on this team, but there's only so many shots and so many minutes to go around, and balancing player development with being competitive on this roster is going to be a very tall task. The following players are all likely to be veterans expecting key rotational minutes next season: Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, Jeff Green, Jock Landale, and even Jason Tate. And the following young players will all be expecting significant minutes while also needing to get minutes to continue their development and in turn raise the future upside of the Rockets. And those guys are Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Cam Whitmore, Amen Thompson, Alperen Sengun, Terry Eason, and Kevin Porter Jr. At minimum, 12 players are going to desire regular rotational minutes next season, 4 of which you just signed in free agency, and 7 of them will rely on getting playing time to further the development and further the future of the Rockets. Simply put, balancing the needs of 12 players in a rotation whilst managing the development of 7 young players is going to be nearly impossible. Their signings this summer become especially frustrating when you consider it in the lens of balancing minutes and ensuring their youth continues to develop, most specifically with who they selected in the draft. The Rockets selected Amen Thompson with pick number 4 in the draft, presumably selecting their point guard of the future. But they followed it up by signing all-star point guard Fred VanVleet, seemingly impacting the minutes and the role of Amen Thompson for the next couple years. This discussion does not even include how Kevin Porter Jr. fits into this rotation, and he's been their starting point guard for the last 2 years. The Rockets then followed up the Thompson selection with a selection of Cam Whitmore, who, although was taken at pick 20, was widely believed to be a top 5 to 8 talent heading into the draft and could be the small forward of the future for the Rockets. But then they followed that up by signing Dillon Brooks to be their starting small forward for the foreseeable future as he gets a 4-year deal. So many moves the Rockets made this summer made it significantly harder to focus on continuing their rebuild, to continue to prioritize their player development and continuing to add more young talent to this roster. As now they shift to a point where they have a very crowded roster with a ton of veterans being in the way of their potential stars' opportunities, minutes, and development. Sure, the Rockets will be better next season, There's no doubt about that. And they will likely make some amount of a push for the play-in tournament. In the short term, this offseason will be a win. But an ideal rebuild puts you in a position to be a very competitive roster for the future, to be very competitive for years to come. But everything the Rockets did this offseason jeopardized their rebuild, jeopardized their development, and in turn, jeopardized the longevity of their future.